Hi, I'm Tony Russo, and this is Funeral Service Insider from Kates-Boylston. Each episode features conversations about emerging trends and news that affect the death care industry. We talk to people who understand the delicate balance of change in a profession and vocation steeped in tradition. Happy New Year. This is the first of a two-part year in review episode that will have its own introduction. But before I get to that, I want to ask something of you and play something for you. This week's Funeral Service Insider, due out on January 9th, is a collection of questions that I sent to people who I have interviewed either for the podcast or for the newsletter or for both this year. And I gave everyone the opportunity to respond either by leaving me a voicemail or by writing me their answers. And they chose to write their answers except for two people. Since two people left me a voicemail, I'm going to play you one at the beginning of this episode and another at the beginning of next week's second part of the year in review. But before I do that, I want to invite you to also call and leave a message. Let me give you the number. Do you have a pen? You can call 732-746-0233, extension 709, and leave me a message to be played on the episode. If I choose your message, I will obviously let you, I don't know if it's obvious, but I'll let you know in advance so you know that it's coming out. And it's something that I want to try to do more this year as a way of engaging on this podcast. So if you want to comment on the show, or if you want to make any requests or criticisms, all of that would be great. Would love to hear from you. And email, of course, is still fine as well. And you can email me at arusso@k-like-kite-b-like-boy-publications.com. Links to all of those things in the show notes. And now we're going to hear from Taylor Johnson. She's the Director of Communications at Mueller Memorial Funerals and Cremation. After that, we're just going to get the show started. So I will see you on the other side.
Hi, Tony. This is Taylor Johnson from Mueller Memorial and Interra Green Burial by Mueller Memorial. Just to respond to your question, what was a professional victory I particularly remember from the last year and why? I would say certainly it was being a part of getting natural organic reduction legalized in the state of Minnesota. I was on the podcast with you to talk about having a brand focus on more sustainable disposition options. And part of our goals for that were to get NOR legalized in Minnesota. And with a group of very committed individuals in our state, we got that passed. And then also because of that, two of us have been invited to speak at Terracon, the convention that's happening in February in Tacoma, Washington, talking about NOR and how we went about getting NOR legalized in our state. So we're going to be speaking there, and that's a huge moment for us. So thanks so much. Thanks for having us on the show, and we look forward to 2025.
This week, we're doing something that we haven't done in almost a year. And my guest, Tom Nondorf, editor of American Cemetery and Cremation, has not done it before. We're going to do our year in review. So we're going to go through some of the stories that we remember that we liked, some of the stories that we remember that people seemed to react to, and of course, all of the changes that have gone on, especially each of us has made lots of changes. Tom has reimagined what this magazine can do, and I've done a lot more of the digital stuff, and all of that happened in the last 12 months. So I usually don't say welcome, which is why I haven't said welcome yet, but welcome, Tom.
Hello. I was thinking about, remember Lenny and Squiggy, how they would always enter and say hello right at the most opportune moment. Good to see you, Tony, or good to talk to you, Tony.
We were going over some of the things that we wanted to talk about before the show, but this is also going to be a little bit freeform, so don't be surprised if I double back on myself. You might recognize Tom's voice from the couple of episodes that he has done the interviews for, and also you might recognize him from last week's bonus episode, which was him reading this fantastic story. And I do want to ask you, bang, 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 you can answer all three of these questions at the same time. What did you think about the story and the way that it sounded? What was it like to do the interviews? And will we hear more from you in 2025? Not to put you on the spot.
You mean what was it like to sit in for you a couple times and do the podcast? Oh, it was great. It was great. I mean, you set the bar pretty high. You had a very smooth sound, a smooth voice, but what I wanted to do was, kind of boost your ego by having the lowest rated episodes of
which, of course,
history.
you don't. People love the cemetery stuff when we do it. Whenever I do cemetery stuff, the two most popular topics really are the cemetery ones and the mortuary school ones. Those are the most popular shows. The second part of the question was, did you feel like it's something you might like to do? I think you kind of choose it by stories that you like, that you did kind of that how did you end up choosing those guests?
Mr. Antonucci was the insurance guy, and I met him at the ICCFA convention. And what was great was he's a listener. He might be listening right now, but he's a guy like me who's just getting into the field, and he really was a guy who wanted to absorb everything. And so he found your podcast, and I think he subscribes to the Kates-Boylston publications, which is American Funeral Director, American Cemetery and Cremation, plus FSI, which, pat yourself on the back, that's Tony's work also, folks. And I just liked a guy who is so willing to learn, And then I thought, what does it take, to be that specialized in insurance that you want to talk about cemeteries? So I thought that was really great. And it's just people who want to talk.
Well, and that's the thing. He was very engaged. And I think you can tell when people like what they're talking about. One of the reasons that we like to choose stories that I don't want to say already done, but choose people that we've already spoken to about a topic is because we know how well spoken they were in the beginning. And so they're not going to get worse at it the second time.
It means everything to have people engaged. And that's probably... So for folks out there, I just started a year ago at American Cemetery and Cremation. So I'm still learning a bit, but my sort of manifesto involves getting people more engaged. And people in the cemetery industry, as in the death care industry at large, aren't always the easiest to engage for a lot of reasons. They're very busy people. They're, so they're engaged all day long with the people they have to engage with. So it's not like they need to be giving us more of their time, but, folks who read and folks who have stuff they want to say, we want to hear it, because there's so many ways to help other people in this field. So it's been fun, the people who do engage. So I want to increase people, sharing stuff. I think that's probably helpful for you too, in terms of what you do, just people sharing stories and experiences.
Well, and that's one of the tough things is when you don't get, we know that people are reading, like, especially I know that most people open the emails. I know that most people click through to the stories. So I know that they're at least starting them, but it's still like, it still feels a lot of times, it can feel like you're kind of shouting into the void anyway, when you don't get, I get enough emails. I'm going to keep doing it, but I get enough emails to know that people are reading it. But it's just, it's important to have that as a measure of satisfaction more than anything else.
Yeah, it's always great to know you're not shouting out to nobody and hearing back. And when you go to the conventions and talk to people, you realize people are listening. That was what was great about talking with Mr. Antonucci. Was like, that was the first time I was like, you heard, I think he had heard the episode that I was on with you when you and I talked, and it was like, okay, people are out there. This is great. And you asked about the Christmas story and what was interesting about that. That for me it was a great chance to get that out there. It was sort of tangentially cemetery related, but that happened to me. And that's a story that I can tell. I can dine out on. People love to hear that story. So I'm just tooting my own horn, but if you haven't listened or read the story in our publication, it's called Christmas Breakdown, and it's our very own sort of Christmas sweater or Christmas shoes story.
But cooler.
You could think of it that way. Cooler, yeah. I don't actually know the plots of those stories, but
they're not great.
Call it the Christmas carburetor story. I don't know, but the thing that happened there, it was an object lesson for me in media coverage. After my friend died, who is the main subject of the story, I was reached out to by a journalist in Birmingham who was like, I heard this great story, can you tell me it? And he interviews me, but I could tell he's being really quick. He wasn't really wanting to dig in.
He was on assignment.
Yeah. He just wanted a quick soundbite of what all had happened. And I knew as soon as I got done talking to him, my friend's wife is the one who'd asked me to talk to them about it. So I was like, you sure it's okay if I tell the story publicly, And she said, yeah. Well, the story's printed, and the guy had focused on all the wrong things, and he botched it. And I talked to the family involved in the story, and they were like, yeah, we were so disappointed. So this for me was a great chance to kind of get that story out there in a real way.
Yeah, and get it right.
These people who helped me years ago and that we stayed in touch over the years. So hopefully it makes, but it really does connect in terms of what happens when you remember the good things people have done for you.
And I think one of the things we can look forward to more in the next year are more stories like that. Like you had a great one. I know I promised that I wouldn't ask you without telling you, but I'm going to anyway, about the stadium near your college.
That's another story from my time down south. Yeah. I mean, that was a cemetery I found out. So I went to the University of Georgia. On the opposite side of Sanford Stadium is a cemetery, Oconee Hill Cemetery. A gentleman named Don Smith is the GM there. Well, this was at the same convention down in Tampa, ICCFA. And I see a guy, said Oconee Hill, comes walking by our booth there. I said, Don Smith, huh? I know the name of that cemetery. I know that cemetery. In college, I found it one time. I wandered over onto the other side of the stadium and I found it because it wasn't sort of obviously located. Well, he sat and talked with me for an hour, and this guy was the most interesting guy. And he's, in his 70s, I think, but he'd become the GM there and turned that cemetery around from a place that was basically closed off, didn't want people ever there, visitors, to a place that was very welcoming and, started selling plots and clearing out ways. They sell plots because University of Georgia plays pretty good brand of college football. People want to see it. And so, they have that crazy brand of Southern football fan. So some people buy plots where they can be kind of overlooking a slight view of the stadium. So that's a big deal for them down there. So it was just a great story. And I just happened to meet a guy and know that cemetery. Similarly, we had cemeteries a lot that applied for our ACE award, and they kind of make the case and tell all the great things they have going on. And one was a cemetery in Maryville, Indiana, which I grew up less than a mile from that cemetery. So you get these oddities.
I'm sorry, I have to ask, is that the cemetery where they found the leg?
When I got this job, I thought, man, will I be able to come up with enough stories about cemeteries? And then it's like, man, I have a few, I guess. But yeah, Tony's talking about the leg story, which I did, I think, that was around Halloween time, I think. So I thought it was appropriate to share this bizarre story. But yeah, that was a cemetery, not the same cemetery. This was a cemetery in my hometown of Crown Point, Indiana. Where I lived. So after I was 4 years old, I moved to Crown Point, and between home and school was a cemetery, and you weren't supposed to cut through it. Well, one day some kids cut through it. They found a bag with a human leg inside it and dumped it out. And, it was there for all of us, my sisters and I, to see. And my father eventually came and we saw it until the police came and took the leg away. And what was most funny to me over the years about that story was how, we didn't talk about it. What it was until years later, I said to my sisters, did this really happen? We saw a leg. We didn't go for counseling. It didn't even make the papers, man. No. This was small town USA. So as I think I said to you at the time, it's like when Blue Velvet came out, and it's like, oh, guy found an ear. That was the plot point of that David Lynch movie. But I was like, ear? We found a whole leg and nobody cared.
And thank you for providing the segue. The other thing that you brought, in addition to great writing and fun stories from both you and your contributors, and I can't say the young woman's name who does the headstone feature.
Oh, Tui Snyder. I'm so happy I found her. And that's another bizarre thing where my mom, found out I took a job with writing about cemeteries. So as moms do, she randomly ordered me 3 books about cemeteries that she thought would help. And I'm like, oh, thanks, Mom, And then one of them was by this woman, Tui Snyder, out of Texas, who is just amazing at researching cemeteries and the different symbols you find on headstones. And she's literally right now, she just emailed me from Norway, where she is going to be looking at cemeteries there and doing her thing for a couple months, going around Europe. First off, she gets us amazing photos that go with her stories, but she also, she just has a lot of knowledge. And that's strictly, I have my mother to thank for that, because I got in touch with Tui. We did a story where I just interviewed her, and then I enjoyed it so much. I said, you want to write for us some? And she's been great. So you can look forward to her just about every month in American Cemetery and Cremation.
One of the things that I always get a kick out of is that she just has a natural approach to, I've read drier things, and I think that's what's so exciting now is the magazine's a little bit more alive and has this kind of the contributors are compelling and your stuff is compelling. What I was getting to was the movie section that you added, which is always fun. Sometimes I'll choose my movie based on your recommendation. I came this close to watching the Frankenstein Girlfriend movie. I can't recall the title.
Yes, what is that? Lisa Frankenstein.
Right.
Lisa Frankenstein. I just saw that on an airplane when I was maybe coming back from a convention or something, and I was like, "Oh, this is good," because I had a lot of cemetery scenes, and it basically the Frankenstein character digs himself up out of the grave to be with this girl, and it's an absurd movie. It really walks the line between really bad taste and dark humor and a mixture of both. Not everybody loves it, but that was a fun one to write about. My favorite one to write about, I think, was the James Bond movie where James Bond starts to get cremated at one point.
Yeah.
And that was really, the exteriors anyway were shot in Las Vegas at a couple of places there, because James Bond ends up getting conked in the head with an urn that was supposed to be filled with diamonds. And because I remember seeing that when I was a kid, the scene where he was in the coffin and they turn on the flames. That freaked me out. It really,
yeah.
And so I was like, I don't want to do only cemetery scenes in movies. That was a cremation scene that was very effective for me.
Do you get people suggesting scenes? How do you find scenes? You just rely mostly on your memory? Where do you run these down?
Yes, mostly on my memory. This is when I talk about engagement. I would love a lot more people suggesting stuff and bringing it to the table in everything that we do. And so I hope people get to where they feel a comfort level with the magazine. I've had I would say, since the early months of me starting, people reaching out more and giving me feedback. And now we have that editorial board, which we can talk about later, that we're going to be engaging with, and hopefully we'll find more ways to get people out there engaged. I would love to hear from people, different movies that would be fun to write on. It's not supposed to be overly serious, It's supposed to be a little, something to go with, a little spoonful of sugar with the medicine, because we have a lot of great people giving a lot of great business advice. That's an important part of the magazine. We're not out here doing a magazine that's just about spooky cemeteries, haunted this and that. Mm-hmm. But we want to mix in that history, and we want to mix in where cemeteries are in the culture. So I think, movies is a big part of where they are. It's a big part of some people's views of cemeteries and what makes them spooky or not spooky. If you're listening out there and you have a scene that takes place in a cemetery, a crematory that you want to share, hit me up.
The other new addition to the magazine was Ledger Stones and the back page in general, which if you're not a subscriber, one of the things you're missing out on is the back page, which has Sem Jams, and we'll talk about that. And then it has like a little word puzzle. We'll talk about that. I have a good story about the word puzzle, and it has a column by this Ledger Stones character. What's going on there?
Ledger Stones is kind of like our employee at large at Kates-Boylston. Nobody really knows kind of what he does, where he can be found.
Yeah, he's always someplace weird.
He's always out there on the road, exploring cemeteries, exploring crematories, trying to find out things. And then he just files his dispatches with us, and we kind of take them as they are. And the idea there was just to leave people with a little bit of personality. I always remember reading whatever I was reading as a kid, a comic book. He'd finish the story, and then might be a page of from Stan Lee or something where he's talking about the staff there, the bullpen, the writers, and a little bit about what they have coming up. And I just wanted to leave people with that kind of feeling when they got to the last page of the magazine. And Ledger Stones, I can't say exactly how he showed up in our lives, but he's here. We're grateful for him. He doesn't always know how grateful we are for him, but I think he's a good guy with a good and interesting point of view.
What I love about this back page is if I wasn't doing this job and I picked up a magazine called American Cemetery, the first thing I would do is look at the back page, because I'm of, I guess, the last of a generation where a lot of back pages were fun when we were having magazines. Like almost all of them are more fun. Like the most fun you're going to have in one page of a magazine is going to be that back page.
Yeah. I always tell a story. I think I told you before, it's just like, if I was in the bathroom, I'd be stuck often in relationships with, not stuck in relationships, but I would be in relationships and stuck in the bathroom with women's magazines, All I could find was the last page, this was usually the most interesting thing to read. So I thought, I don't know, and I'd love people to tell me, I don't know where American Cemetery and Cremation sits in people's worlds. Is it on the desk of some people? Is it sitting in a lobby for people to read? Is it in a magazine rack? Do they have it in their restroom? I don't know.
Right.
All of these things are possible, but, we put this out for people to read, and sometimes you don't come from the front. Sometimes you start from the back, and then you say, oh, well, this is interesting. Let me see what else is in here. So the thing I've tried to do is make the back really nice and make the covers a little bit more eye-catching, I hope.
And one of the things that I want to tease you for publicly was the only typo so far in your word scramble that you do. And it was early on, and it got me not in trouble, but one of our bosses was teasing us because I didn't catch the fact that there was no answer to the word jumble. And I responded that, well, that's because I had like 4 yellow pads filled with it had never occurred to me that it might not be right. And I couldn't figure out. I had a list of almost words that it was, but every week it's one of the things I look forward to. Proofing a magazine is not as much fun. It's not as sexy as it sounds.
First of all, when that happened, I was so proud, because it was like, oh, these guys are really trying to solve the puzzle. First is like, I don't know what the hell this is, But you guys took it seriously, and our boss actually said, hey, I plugged it into, a word scrambling software that those type of things exist. And he's like, I think you broke it, man. I mean, nothing was coming out. And what had happened, and why that was slightly embarrassing for me, is I used to edit pencil puzzles and crossword puzzles for a living. I worked for Dell Magazines in New York, and, that was my job. I had to trial test those kind of puzzles. And what had happened was there was a combination of letters in that particular puzzle. And I was reminded, oh, you can't, that almost looks like it could be pronounced like a curse word. You had to make sure there wasn't anything like that. So I made a last minute switch, and I goofed up one of the letters, and then I ruined you guys' day, apparently.
I like to say that I'm good at the word jumbles. And for me, I'd like to not use paper. I like to do it in my head. It's just a challenge. And I can do about, let's say, half so far of yours in my head. And sometimes I need paper, but I rarely need like an hour to do it. And I was like, after an hour, I know a lot of words. And after an hour, it still didn't even occur to me. And I'm like, wow, this is just outside of my expertise. But if I was such a good word jumbler, I probably should have noticed that it was this word, which is the answer, and then this letter also, so I guess it accidentally took me down a peg or two.
Again, that's just another thing when we're trying to test some engagement. We put those, our brilliant marketing person here, Lucia, she puts those on Facebook. Occasionally people try and guess, and that's a lot of fun. Similar with the list of songs we put on there, that is a Spotify list I've been compiling. Ledger Stones has been compiling for the past year. I've been helping him out with it. But we've had a few people give us songs and artists to put on there from actual cemeteries. So those are ones where we've had some successful engagement.
Yeah, no, it's super cool. And I told you before we got started, I think I recommended them to my daughters for Halloween. They were looking for something to listen to. And I said, well, check this out. Not all of the songs are not for everyone. I like that about it because it's surprising. And sometimes I'm like, well, I can skip that song. And I don't feel bad about skipping a song because, it's not a commentary on the list, except that the list is eclectic in, the real sense, not in some hippie sense.
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of music out there that touches on death care themes. So I don't know, on a place like Spotify, there's probably people doing similar things, but I wanted to say, all right, things that specifically talk about cemeteries, cremation, other elements, and you're going to get all different types of songs. There's a song I put on called Jonathan Richman, and it's by Jonathan Richman, called I Hear You Calling Me, which is based on an old song by John McCormick. Sang it in for the first time, I think in 1909 or something like that. It's an incredible song. If you take the time to listen to the lyrics, I mean, it's just the most haunting song. If you go through this relationship, and he's like, I hear you calling me. And the next time he's like, oh, I hear you calling me from somewhere else. And then at the end, you realize he's just standing on her grave, but he still hears the sound of her voice. And then it's just an incredible song. And Jonathan Richman did a remake of it in, the 80s and did a great job with it. I didn't have the cojones to put the actual 1908 version into the playlist yet or submit that for the playlist. But one of these days, I'll do that too.
And is that another one that you pull out of your head, or do you do research for that? Do you get suggestions for other cemetery related songs?
Yeah, with Sand, that's one where we've had some success.
No, I mean, I don't know how Spotify works. Does it this?
I see what you're saying.
You might like this. Do they do that on Spotify?
They do, but not so much cemetery theme songs. No, but what happens? You could type in the word cemetery and get a ton, and then you might find a playlist through that of people who are doing. Oh, here's a Halloween playlist, and then go through there. I just have a ridiculously encyclopedic list of songs in my own head, and then.
You're a music guy.
And between Ledger and I, we just kind of work with stuff that we know, or you run across, just the word cemeteries in this song. We can file this one away for the future.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons that that you work so well together, because it's so eclectic, because you guys have these opposing personalities.
If that works, yeah.
So. So one of the things that we actually talked about before we got the show started is the Slate story you did, and it was a great story. It was a great notion, and it had a beautiful cover. It was just like a kind of like a trifecta opportunity. So where did you get the story from? Was that something you found? Did they reach out to you? And can you tell everybody a little bit about it?
That's J. David Gillespie at Pumpkin Town Primitives out in South Carolina. How I found that, I think I was just looking around on Reddit, and there are subreddits on Reddit where people post really cool looking headstones or ask questions, how would I get, sort of a bespoke headstone? And somebody linked and said, this guy's amazing. And I looked into that, and then I said, wow, let's reach out to this guy. Now, if you were to talk to J. David Gillespie, it's so pleasing because he is what he does, he met his wife at a reenactment type of scenario at Mount Vernon, George Washington's house, where, they were dressed in costume and he was carving headstones and she was doing her craft items or whatever. And they hit it on. I mean, but he lives in that headspace. He's very old school, very much a man of God and kindness. And even after he saw the story for the first time, first he was somewhere else when the story came out. And it was right when that hurricane blew through that part of South Carolina, flooded. He came back and I didn't hear from him for a while. I was like, dude, you all right? He finally got in touch with me. He's like, oh, yeah, we didn't have phone. We didn't have internet.
Wow.
But praise be your story. It was amazing how good it came out and how long it was, which was fun. You never know. You're like, was it too long? Are you saying it's too long?
Well, it was long.
You figure the subject himself is saying it. He's happy with it. But a guy who just basically wanted to learn from childhood. His mom would take him to cemeteries, and he became fascinated and was like, "What's this? And this is a little different than different type of stone than I'm used to seeing." And he learns about slate. He goes up to Boston and studies under a woman about how to a woman who's an expert up there about carving in slate and carving letters in the old school way, basically doing perfect imitations of the type of headstones that exist in cemeteries up in New England, and then just starts doing that as his living. And he's found people and cemeteries who take his work.
It's absolutely
And,
bananas.
Yeah.
I would like to do that just so I could tell people what I did at parties. I would go to more parties if I did something that cool. Oh, what do? I hand carve headstones from slate.
Yeah, it's not weird enough to just say I write about cemeteries and death care all day long.
Yeah, no. One of the really fun things is, do you want to say where you can be found on Reddit? Are you findable on Reddit? Are you active there in a cemetery capacity?
I'm not findable on there. I go on like anyone else and just reads and looks at people. It's been a source for stories of talking to people that I've learned about on there. Headstone restoration people, because there are subreddits that are very specific. So it's a good place to go and find stories for sure. But I don't have my own sort of persona or anything on there.
Yeah, I was wondering about that because I belong to a couple of Reddits, but it's the same thing. I don't feel confident or competent to even start, The last thing that I want to talk about, because we brought it up earlier, is what's coming up for 2025 at Kates-Boylston, because we've got this advisory board that all of us have taken turns reporting on. What's your take on it? Tell everybody what it is, and then we can talk about it a little bit.
I guess there had never been an advisory board for Kates-Boylston, who has the two print publications are like 100 years old and 130 years old or something like that.
Yeah.
Right? These go way back. And as far as we could tell, there hasn't been an advisory board. And Sophia Galler, our publisher and boss here, she thought it'd be a good idea just to, when we talk about getting feedback and stuff, it's not like we can go with our hat out and say, because we try, hey,
yeah,
folks. But there are a lot of people in this business who respect the Kates-Boylston brand and are interested in sort of, hey, how can they help in regards to guidance on that? For me, it seems like a great opportunity to get more stories. I know for you, it's going to be people to talk to for the podcast. And I think it's only going to be good. It's a lot of people, I'd say 2 or 3 in the cemetery space, because a lot more of what we do involves the funeral care space. So there's a lot of that. And then attendant industries and elements that are adjacent to both spaces. So, I think it's important because we talk a lot about the time of change that we're in,
right?
And modernizing and people's fears about modernizing and cremation rise, blah, blah, blah. And, but what's the way forward and what's the way to keep reaching people, especially in this climate when, I don't want to sound like an old person, which I am, but, attention spans, not everybody's sitting there reading magazines and even digital things. So what's the best way to kind of capture and also teach people? What I'd be curious also to hear your take on it.
I don't think I can improve upon what you said. I'm excited for the opportunity to have large discussions with enough people to give me a sense of, where I stand. Like, it's important to have well-formed opinions, and getting more perspectives can only improve that. Because I can be an opinionated guy, and it's always important to talk to people, for me, who don't share my opinion, so I can moderate myself insofar as I'm able.
I think that's been the draw of me working at Kates-Boylston, and what has made it fun and what has made your stuff fun to read is that there are, again, industry adjacent publications and things that do a good job, but they're often, marching to the beat of a particular vendor or whatnot. And we don't have that, so we are, as we proclaim, to be the independent voice in the field. And, that allows us to have opinions. And I think that's great. I think that makes it something where people read and they say, okay, this is not just another thing where somebody's telling me the best way to build up pre-need things or whatnot.
Yeah.
It's more, and it's like, you need that, you need those lessons, but also what's your point of view, like you said.
Excellent. And so I want to just ask you the question that I always ask at the end. What are we missing? Is there a story that you thought you'd get to tell that you didn't get to tell in this episode?
Well, one story that I just liked having written, it was fun to write, but, because it's sort of a challenge in the cemetery space, was just about what I called the cleanup crisis. Do you remember that one?
Yeah. I love that story. That was a very good story.
The idea was basically, we would see these stories all the time cropping up. You'll see them every few weeks. Somebody went to the cemetery to find a teddy bear in a vase that they left on a grave, and it had all been thrown into a pile somewhere. And the stories were always the same. This pile was there, and then, somebody calls a local news station, and the news station's out there, and it's just so easy to make everybody look bad. You see a pile with a dead teddy bear in it, and not dead teddy bear, but not looking good. And it's such a trap for people to set in. You say, what is it worth it? Obviously, and what's the balance? Because there is a reason for it. You can't have a free for all. When I eventually reached a guy who worked at one of the cemeteries in the story, he told me, it was becoming such a mess there. It was a disgrace. So we had to do something about it. We gave plenty of warning. Well, you don't hear that part of the story in the local news. Right. It's just too easy. So how do you not fall into that trap? What's the way that you can help people get rid of the stuff at some point? Or you become one of those cemeteries that people would never think to bring a Mylar balloon to, if I do that, they'll dig up my friend and take him out of here. So I'm not going to ever do that. So it's like, what's the balance? That was a fun story to write, in the sort of early days of my expertise, such as it is, to just sort of dig into the balance of what it takes to keep everybody happy and not come out looking like a media sensation,
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for hanging out.
I appreciate it, Tony. Next up, I'm going to grill you about some of the stuff you've been talking about.
And we will put that up next week. Thanks for listening. That will do it for this week. Before I get to the final credits, I do want to say that I know I had a cold when we recorded this. I believe that you do as well. As you're listening to this, I am re-recording my answers for part 2 because it wasn't really that bad. I asked questions and Tom did most of the talking in this episode. We're going to flip that script in the next episode, and the problem is that it's really hard to listen to me with a stuffy nose for 35 minutes. I would never do that to you. So I'm re-recording my answers. They're essentially the same, just without the stuffiness. And it's something that I've never done before, and I won't do again. It was just bad luck, and we ran out of time, and I had to finish the show while I had a cold before Christmas. That's not me complaining. That's me explaining. Also, let me remind you can subscribe to us on your iPhone or on your Android phone by choosing the podcatcher of your choice. If you have an iPhone, you can just go to the Apple Podcast icon, click on that, and type Funeral Service Insider. We will come up. We are the first one because we're the only one with that name. And it will give you a notification every time we put a show out. If you have an Android phone, you can either download a podcatcher. There are 1,000 of them out there. Many of them are very good. You can use Spotify or Amazon Music, and it's the same thing. Just click on Spotify, for example, type in Funeral Service Insider, and on Spotify, I think it says subscribe, but whether it says subscribe or whether it says follow, the show is always free to download and to listen to. We're just so happy to have you with us. That's the most important part for us right now. And if you would like to participate in the show, you please can reach out to me via the website. As I mentioned up front, if you would like to leave audio feedback for me to play on the show, you can do it at 732-746-0233, extension 709. That is 732-746-0233. extension 709. I would love to read, or rather replay, your answers on the show. If you'd like to just send me email, you can do that at arusso@kbpublications.com. That is the letter A, RUSSO at K like Kates, B like Boylston, publications.com. I'd be happy to read or just respond personally to anything you have to say. Funeral Service Insider, the podcast, is a Kates-Boylston production. It was written and edited by me, Tony Russo. Thank you so much for listening. I'm looking forward to having a fantastic year with lots of great shows and lots of great articles and lots of great other fun stuff at Funeral Service Insider and at KB Publications at large. And we will check in with you next time on Funeral Service Insider, the podcast.